Hello and welcome to this Personnel Today webinar in association with People Safe. Research out this week shows that workers in the nighttime economy, particularly women, face significant levels of violence, aggression and sexual harassment while at their place of work or while commuting to and from work. Today's webinar looks at how much employers should help allay staff's personal safety fears, where their responsibilities lie, and how this relates to the organisation's wellbeing strategy. Are employers doing enough? And if they're not, what more should they be doing? Not just for people working at night or for lone or vulnerable workers, but potentially for all staff in all locations. I'm Rob Moss, I'm editor of Personnel Today, and in a moment I'll ask our panel to introduce themselves, but before I do, I'll just run through a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be just under an hour, beginning with presentations from our speakers, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So we are, of course, keen to hear from you, the audience. So please do share your comments and questions at any time. And you can do this in the questions tab to the right of your screen. I'll attempt to relay as many of those questions to our panelists. And the slides that we show you, they will be sent out by email after the webinar, along with a link to watch the recording. Okay, let's get moving. First, let's meet our panel, starting with you, Naz.
Thank you, Rob. Hi there. My name's Naz Dossa. I'm the CEO here at People Safe.
Hi, Anil.
Yep. Hi, Rob. So my name's Anil Champaneri. I'm a senior HR consultant and also the technical lead at Alchemist PSM.
And finally, Saskia, welcome.
Hello, lovely to see you all. I'm the head of policy and campaigns at the Susie Lampley Trust.
Thank you, Saskia. Okay, let's kick off with a poll for our audience. And this relates to some of what we're going to be talking about, of course. And the poll is, where do you think employers should be responsible for their people's safety? You'll find that in the polls tab if you can't see it already. And the options are at all times, only in the workplace, at home when working remotely. Can see people see that poll. I'm not sure if it's there. Yes, people are voting. Sorry, right. So the options are at all times, only in the workplace, at home when working remotely, or on client visits or business travel. I can see many of you are voting. Just give you a little bit longer. Most people are saying at all times, 93%. 4% are saying at home or when working remotely, and 2% are saying only in the workplace. Of course, because most people are saying at all times, the other ones are very small. So I'll hand over to you, Naz, and I'll let you take over with the presentation.
Thank you, Rob. And that poll is, of course, a perfect segue in what we want to talk about today. So I think the word hybrid has never been used as much as it has in the last couple of years. So the world of work has changed forever, pretty much following the pandemic. But the dispersed nature of workforces now means we have a higher focus on well-being, new generation of candidates, and that gives us as employers and people who run businesses different challenges around how we recruit, retain, and motivate our staff. There is definitely a trend that's showing an emerging awareness around personal safety, and this has a direct impact on well-being. So what I would like to go through today is some of the key findings. We did a landmark study. We surveyed and assessed the responses from over 2,000 employees and also 1,000 businesses covering a range of sectors, which we will show you. And we discovered trends around personal safety that we believe have a major impact on well-being. So if I just start with the first sort of set of stats, and there's a little bit of extrapolation here that's done, but the biggest takeaway that we found is that there is a huge number of people who think about their safety every week. And of those we surveyed, it came out at 21%. So if you think about the working population, you could safely say that 6.8 million people are thinking about that on a regular basis. And this isn't down to workplace or type of work. And as we all know, as we've said, and as people have said on the poll, it's not limited to where you are. They're often concerned about the commute to and from, and the fact that we are now seeing the working pattern change. So you're often traveling at unsociable hours. The survey said there that 58% have a negative experience on the commute. And I'll leave that thought with you, because we're going to go on to that a little bit more detail. So if we think about the sectors now, and I take you to the top right of that slide, you can see, I mean, the obvious ones are hospitality and retail. And there's a lot of press around at the moment of some of the increase in attacks. And I think it's 9 out of 10 retail workers have faced an incident. That's an incredible fact, a statistic that's come out this week from the Retail Trust. So, as I said, every sector is reporting a concern. And the main themes that unite them are traveling and commuting, varied locations for work, and not having a safe space at home. And if we think about people working from home and assuming that they're safe because they are at home, in fact, what you have to think about is if an incident does happen and they are truly alone, then how do they get help or raise an alarm? We also have the unfortunate spectre of people suffering domestic abuse. So how is that dealt with? How do they get the ability to report that through? I'll just take you to the next slide. So, as I said, feeling unsafe is prevalent outside of the workplace. 60% are now using public transport at off-peak times. And I was on another webinar earlier in the week, and a statistic came out that there are 1.8 million nighttime workers at any given time. And that's a huge amount of people traveling at times where we see the peak of incidents happening. You see there that 50% traveling alone when they go to and from work, and 65% may be working in an unfamiliar location or situation, or they may be traveling in between roles. So there is a specific example that I'd like to share with you, sort of an anecdote that we got from our survey, and it's to do with a care worker. So this person gave us a story that when they go into people's homes to attend to them, there's been so many incidents that they will stand right by the door so they have the ability to escape, was the words that they used, and that they park their car in such a way that they don't have to reverse out of a space, so they can just get in and get away quickly. I mean, for the role that they're doing, you know, it's unbelievable. These are the lengths that individuals have to go to in order to feel safe and stay safe. So are we, as employers, and I put myself in this bracket as an employer, what's our view, and are we doing enough for the safety concerns? And if you look there, that 38% of employers don't know how to protect their staff. So that's really obviously a concern for us. And 57% of employers underestimated the level of personal security concerns of employees. So a large number openly admit they don't know what to do properly. Staff say, or employees say, they have a good idea of what they want to see, with 2 in 3 believing they just don't have access to the measures that would make them feel safer. So they know what they want, they just don't know where to go and how to get it. And what happens is, as a result, nothing is done. So these concerns go unaddressed, and which leads to employees feeling really let down. So up to 42% just feeling that they didn't have any access to help. And that, the important point here for us and, you know, the wider economy, is that this leads to higher rates of attrition and staff turnover. And as we know as employers, you know, attracting and retaining talent is right now very difficult. And I'm sure that's across businesses and across sectors. And this is definitely having an impact on that. So, the next slide. So we just touched upon it. It's leading to problems with attrition. this is borne out here that one employees are leaving a job, 25%, to safety concern or an experience that they've had in the last 5 years. That's a significant amount of time. So it's not just, oh, there was a recent event and that's caused me to think about things. This is going back quite a long way. So this is definitely being felt in public facing roles, as I alluded to before, around hospitality and retail, and that's probably where we see the spike. But the follow on from that is that 2/3 have said that they wouldn't take a public facing role again, or due to the safety concerns that they see, hear, experience, read about. And this is some of the hardest hit sectors who are trying to recruit at the moment. And I think I watched the BBC News this morning, and the CEO of Next was relaying the challenges that they are having as an institution of trying to hire staff, especially with the busy Christmas period coming on. And this is clearly one of the issues they're having. And added to this, a number of roles are changing as the shape of workforce changes. This has turned some roles into lone worker roles, whereas before they never were considered in that way. And this will affect the duty of care that the employer has to the employee. When we think about well-being and we think about satisfaction and how people feel, this is really saying that if you feel unsafe, you're not satisfied, or you're less satisfied in every area or aspect of your job. And this is from pay to a negative event that may have occurred. So we sometimes consider it in a singular event. There was something that happened and that was it. There is a lasting impact and effect of those events, and not having the ability to necessarily have protection or feel safe, or anyone to talk to, that is. So again, if I pause on this slide, and I think that the two words here for people to really take on board is changing behaviors. And then when I first read this study and the report and the results that we got back, I was quite astounded by this. If you think about this, 83% of people have changed what they do in order to feel safer. So that means, and this is, we spend most of our time at work, as we know, or going to work or traveling to work or whatever it is. So they started traveling to work with a colleague, 18%, starting alerting someone to their whereabouts, changing where they park, change the type of transport, even changing the routes that they use. So this is a huge impact. And again, it often goes unnoticed because it may be happening in the course of the day, not actually when you're doing your work. But it's getting to that point where people are changing the way they do things. But there are ways to help. Now, there are personal safety apps available on all these platforms. We've seen over 1 million plus downloads, and we see this in the industry, and we see a lot of organizations coming to us asking about what can be done. And one example, if I can use, is a company that used to have sort of shift patterns to their working day for their staff, but their staff car park was across the road under a subway, dimly lit, and there were a number of incidents happening. And whilst they were doing sort of don't walk on your own parties type thing, they wanted to work out what they could do as an employer to help their staff and give them access to an employee safety app, which would help them raise an alarm and just get that feeling of safety and knowing that, God forbid something happens, I can raise an alarm to something and get a response. And that's all about well-being and feeling safe. And that's a part of a strategy that I think employees can use. So my final slide, and it's a little bit of a sort of a psychological take on this. And some of you may have seen this is a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we've highlighted there that safety and security is one of those primary needs that we have, as well as all of the others that you can read there. And Deloitte recently did a study that backed this up, that's saying, if you feel safe and secure, you're 20% more productive, less likely to, over a third less likely to leave your job or take time off sick. And the point there in bold, which sort of brings it back to businesses, is that you do see a huge, over 5 times return for every pound that you invest in staff on wellbeing. So I'd just like to leave that thought with you all. Thank you, Rob. Hand it back to you.
Thanks very much, Naz. Got some very interesting statistics in there. Thank you. Next, we're going to talk to or hear from Anil, who is going to be continuing our presentation. There's a poll sitting here on how does your organisation currently provide any of the following? Is that one that we should be doing, Naz, before we hand over to Anil, or I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, can you just...
Should I run through that poll?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I'm just going to publish a poll. Take a look just before we hear from Anil. Where do you think? No, we've just had that one. It's this one. Does your organisation currently provide any of the following? And there are 5 options, and you can choose more than one. So, first option is free taxis, transport. Second option, personal safety devices and apps. Third is buddy systems for workers. Fourth is staff check-ins following client visits. So do vote in that poll, and let's just have a look how we're getting on. Okay, the 5th option was none of the above, and that is getting the most response, with about 40% saying none of those things, around 30% saying the personal safety devices, 15% on buddy systems, 15% on staff check-ins, and only 5% on free transport home at night. Okay, with that, I'll hand over to you, Anil. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Hi, everyone. Well, wellbeing strategies, it's quite a complex area, and obviously we've got limited time today. So I won't be able to go through the full ins and outs, but I do want to focus on mental well-being and safety. So firstly, work can have a significant impact on a person's mental well-being, and employers can help foster a mentally healthy workplace, for example, by taking action to try and prevent and manage stress, and also train line managers on mental well-being. Now, work can be very positive. It can provide self-esteem, it can provide social interaction. But on the flip side of that, it can have a negative impact on mental well-being as well. For example, it may cause employees to experience stress or anxiety. So employers should develop a strategic approach to mental well-being, which means that the actions that they take to provide mental well-being should be integrated into their people management practice and policies. So with regards to stress, organizational factors, including poor relations with colleagues and managers, the physical workplace or environment, or the excess demands that a role puts on someone, but not giving them the appropriate support, can cause a person to experience stress. So employers should treat stress as an important issue and take action to address it, because if you don't, it's very likely it's going to have a negative impact on the employee, and that could impact on performance, engagement, and turnover. With regards to line managers, they're quite central, to be fair, to having a mentally healthy workplace. But, line managers may find it difficult to have conversations around sensitive issues. They may think that managing mental health isn't part of their role. Or a very extreme view might be that if their colleagues have mental health issues, they shouldn't be at work. So what kind of impact can line managers have? Well, they could have a very direct impact, because they can influence how employees feel about coming to work. And that's especially if they're not clear on the expectations that the employees have. And then they can also act as a bit of a gatekeeper. So line managers can influence whether employees are either protected from or exposed to excess pressure. So to maximize the success of a wellbeing strategy, the employer could bring together a group of employees to own it, drive it forward. So you could have a wellbeing working group, wellbeing champions, or a wellbeing coordinator. Now, employee assistance programs, more commonly known as EAPs, can promote well-being and identify where employers need to take action to improve well-being. So having an EAP demonstrates that the employer is concerned for the well-being of their employees. Now, the services that EAPs provide can vary, but the typical things that you may see are confidential short-term counselling, advice on money and managing debt, or providing legal information and guidance. And obviously, in the current cost of living crisis, advice on managing money or struggling with your mental health are going to be utilised. Now, employers should put in place measures that help to prevent workplace violence and support employees after an incident has occurred. So workplace violence, whether that's physical or verbal, is an issue for some organizations. For example, call center workers are going to be at risk of experiencing verbal abuse. So when seeking employees' views on whether violence is a problem in the workplace, obviously the approach of each employer is going to be different, but as a minimum, there should be these informal discussions with managers and staff. You could hold workshops, you could consult with health and safety, and you could use questionnaires, which may give people the opportunity to be more open. Now, violence at work can cause people to experience stress, anxiety, and fear. And these could result in either short-term or long-term absences. Now, that person may also experience a loss in confidence, and obviously that is going to then have an impact on their duties. So employees should conduct a risk assessment of violence towards employees. Now, that assessment should identify which employees are at risk of experiencing violence, and then that could lead to the development of actions to help mitigate the given risks. So if there are these risks identified, what could you do? Well, some examples are, the employer could adopt a policy on workplace violence, which then clearly sets out their approach to minimizing physical and verbal abuse from customers and third parties, and what support is then available for the employees who experience it. The employer should inform employees what the risks of abuse they face in their role are. The employer should consider employing an early warning system, which could help highlight employees which clients are potentially violent or where there are problem areas, perhaps provide some training so that they can look to de-escalate issues or spot the signs. The employer should consider how it could use equipment and location to try and help deal with violence. So it could give employees personal telephones or personal alarms for that purpose. Look at installing CCTV in those high-risk areas. Other physical measures could be alarm systems, security doors, or even physical barriers. So when you're designing workplace practices, try and avoid lone working and potentially violent situations. And where possible, obviously reduce the need for staff to carry anything valuable, like money, for example. Now, where an incident occurs, the employer should obviously provide the appropriate support and take any other steps needed as necessary to deal with the incident. Now, what that support and action would be obviously depends on the severity of the incident and the impact it has on the employee that's sadly been a victim of it. But obviously, as a minimum, when you're dealing with the aftermath, you should be immediately providing support to that employee. You may need to secure your work premises. You might even need to inform the police if it's been particularly serious. What about medium-term support? Well, giving those victims an opportunity to talk about the incident will naturally help. Being aware of any signs of trauma, talked earlier about EAPs. If you have one in place, you may refer them to the counselling service available on that. You might even want to consider whether you need to make a temporary change to that person's role, just to give them a chance to recover. Now, a law to protect frontline workers, and that includes police officers, healthcare workers, and retail workers from violence, took effect in England and Wales in June 2002. And the Police Crime and Sentencing and Courts Act actually doubles the maximum penalty that can be given to individuals who assault such workers from 12 months to 2 years imprisonment. So the new penalties took effect as the Institute of Customer Service, which represents those kinds of businesses with customer-facing staff, published research finding 44% of frontline service staff had experienced hostility from customers in 6 months from February, when it was only 35%, which is still obviously a very high number, sadly. But what about the risk faced by employees when they're commuting to work? So for a number of employees, the concern is not actually what happens at work, but what are the risks if they're having to use public transport to get there? Would an employer's duty of care extend to those people during the commute? Well, in terms of health and safety obligations, there's 4 key legal responsibilities. So you've got health and safety legislation, you've got a common law duty of care. Now that duty is to take reasonable care for the health and safety of your employees, probably unlikely to extend to that employee's commute. Then there's the duty of trust and confidence. So an employer also has an implied contractual duty to not act in a way which would destroy the relationship of trust and confidence. And this underpins all employment relationships. Now, as a sort of real world example, when we think about things opening up after the pandemic, it was actually possible that a court could conclude that an employer's implied duties of care and that need to maintain trust and confidence required would mean that they had to have regard to, the risks of an employee's commute if they were to, in case they were at risk of catching COVID-19. So obviously that was quite a unique situation. And again, it's unlikely that duty is probably going to extend to the threat of violence on somebody's commute. Now, fourthly, there is the duty not to subject employees to a detriment or dismiss them for taking evasive action over a serious and imminent danger. So can an employee's commute amount to a serious and imminent danger? Well, under Section 44 of the Employment Rights Act 1996, employees should not be subjected to any detriment for refusing to come to work where they reasonably believe they are in serious and imminent danger. Now, it doesn't matter if the employer agrees with that view or not. The question is whether from the employee's perspective, is it reasonable to have that fear? Now, it's a statutory right, and it appears really more maybe to be designed to protect people from immediate danger, like a fire, for example. And it's not very clear whether it is designed to cover commutes to work. Now, there is an interesting case, actually. In 2014, you had Edwards versus the Secretary of State for Justice. So this concerned 13 prison officers who refused to travel to work along a road which had been closed due to heavy snow. So they were required to wait at an agreed pickup point with other prison staff as well. And this was all in accordance with the employer's adverse weather policy. The prison sent vehicles to pick up staff, and most of the staff got in the vehicles and travelled safely to work. Now, those 13 claimants, they refused, and they were citing that they were fearing for their safety. They weren't paid for that day, and they actually bore unlawful deductions from wages claims, and also a claim for saying they'd suffered detriment under Section 44 of the Act. Now, the Employment Tribunal, or ET, actually dismissed their claim, but the Employment Appeal Tribunal, so the EAT, allowed an appeal, and they did that on the basis that the ET had not properly considered the reasonableness of the officer's belief that travelling in that snow-laden road could put them in serious and imminent danger. And significantly, the EAT said that it was not relevant that some of the other prison staff had got there safely, as this didn't have any bearing on the reasonableness of the claimant's belief. Now, the journey to work in this case was obviously unusual because it involved travelling on a relatively remote road, to Dartmoor Prison, the officers had been asked to meet in a supermarket car park, and it was prison vehicles that was coming to collect them. So, arguably, the employer has assumed some responsibility in that situation. And that's obviously very different from somebody using public transport to get to work from the city, work in the city, or, if they haven't got a car, for example, to use. So although the ATA's judgment didn't deal specifically whether Section 44 would cover travel to and from work, it didn't cover that, and it didn't cover the point about, what happens if you fail to pay someone. So not helpful in that regard, but it is an interesting case. However, just from looking at it and reading into it, I'm not sure it would then cover or help to cover what, if you feared traveling to work because of potential violence en route. So what else can an employer do? Well, they could offer a travel solution. So if you have lots of employees that need to be at site on a certain time, then you could look at providing some sort of commuter bus, which enables them to travel safely and be on time at work, which is obviously of mutual benefit. Reason for that is staff could be worried about traveling on public transport if they work irregular hours or shift patterns where public transport is reduced or not running, or they may need to travel late at night. So with the commuter bus service, employees are given the opportunity to travel to work in a secure, reliable and comfortable environment. Other examples include car sharing, of course. Some businesses will provide company vans to their teams so that they can collect each other and drive to site. And as touched on earlier as well, some businesses may even offer taxi services if people are having to work late. I know I had that experience when I worked at a law firm. If you're working late on a deal, there was a taxi available to take you home. What are the benefits then of having a commuter bus service if you went with that route? Well, you can choose multiple pickup points that would best for your employees. You can choose times actually that obviously benefit and correspond with what you need. You might even choose to split the cost of that service with your employees. It can also help, hopefully, reduce the stress of a commute. Obviously, whether you're driving to work or using public transport, a long commute can be stressful. It's going to extend the working day as well, so it means that you've got less time for rest and relaxation. So using some sort of commuter bus service, an employer-provided service like that, could relieve some of that stress and show that people can, and hopefully enable people to be able to come to work less stressed and more relaxed and ready to go. And then finally, I suppose parking issues. Obviously, if you use that commuter bus service, you're not going to have as many parking spaces for your staff because you'll only need a limited number. And obviously, the other example, which was car sharing, that could also be utilised. So I'm just going to hand back to Rob, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Anil. We're going to run another poll before we hand over to Saskia. So this poll is around how much you invest in your employee wellbeing. There's a few options there between less than £10, between £11 and £25, between £26 and £50, and more than £50. So how much do you invest in employee wellbeing per employee? And I can see that people are voting, and top answer is that they don't know. The next one down is more than £50, and then that is about the same level as less than £10. So quite a range of responses there. I'm now going to hand over to Saskia Gardner from the Susie Lamplugh Trust. So over to you, Saskia.
Thanks, Rob. Great to see you all today. I just would really like to talk to you about some of the research that we've done at the Trust into violence, aggression and abuse in the workplace. and particularly the impact on people's mental health. And then finally, look at some of the best practice and solutions that we want to share with you from our experience working with across many sectors, and also the kind of frameworks that we've developed to help employers with that. Just very briefly, for those who don't know us, our trust was set up within a few months of Susie Lamplugh disappearing by her parents. She was an estate agent. She went missing in the course of a normal day, showing a Mr. Kip around a house. She was never seen again, and she was actually assumed murdered some years later. But essentially, her parents set the trust up to raise awareness about personal safety issues, both in the workplace, because of course Susie was at work, but also in our everyday lives, travelling around. And we have a number of long-standing campaigns that date back to Diana Lamplug's involvement herself, including the safety of on public transport and in taxis and minicabs. So our work spans several areas. Oh, sorry, just jumped on a slide there. We have a frontline, we run a frontline service, which is the National Stalking Helpline. So we work with thousands of stalking victims every year. So, you know, do get in touch with us if you have any questions about stalking and how that can manifest in the workplace. But our broader work on the education side, we run multiple training courses on personal safety in the workplace, but also on stalking and harassment. And we run lobbying and campaigning to change legislation and policy where we see fit and where we think that will improve the experience of those who experience the experience of victims. So I think we're all familiar with the costs, really, the financial costs, let alone the cost to employees' wellbeing, which I'll go on to speak about. And we know about the prevalence of incidents of violence at work, around 688,000 in the figures from the crime survey in 2019 to 20. We think these are probably likely to have increased throughout the pandemic, and we know the kinds of the types of violence and aggression that frontline workers were experiencing at that time. We carried out a survey for our Personal Safety Day actually in 2018, looking specifically at the personal safety of retail workers, because we knew at the time that this was something of concern. Some of the unions that we work with on other issues were raising this, and we really wanted to understand this a bit better. And we wanted to understand what measures employers have put in place and how aware employees were of these measures, to get an indicator of, you know, what more needs to be done, essentially. So we had just over 500 respondents, and they were telling us about the kinds of measures that they knew were in place in their workplace. But around 14% didn't know of any measures being in place. This is in relation to personal safety quite broadly. And only around 9% felt that they would get any post-incident support were an issue to arise. So there was a lack of confidence in the support there. Over 50% said that they had security staff on site, which was reassuring, but only about a third knew of a written personal safety policy within their place of work. And fewer still, around a fifth, understood about any reporting procedures within their place of work. And less than a fifth had any kind of personal safety training around de-escalating or keeping safe at work. So we wanted to understand what collective way of the measures to put in place to keep safe. And actually, just under a third said that they thought having security staff on site was the most effective. We are, of course, talking about retail specifically, but that was followed by things like panic buttons and having a clearer understanding of safety policies and procedures, and escalation procedures were something to go wrong. Aggression and abuse, of course, happens online as well as offline. I know we're sort of focusing a bit more on the physical side of violence and aggression today, but actually, you know, what we hear in our research is that there has been quite a concerning increase in online harmful behaviours whilst at work. And our Personal Safety Day last year looked specifically at this. And you can see here that over a third was saying that they were experiencing online abuse whilst at work and on platforms where that they were using either social media platforms or platforms they were using for work that was being misused for harmful behaviours. And over 80% said that this cyber abuse had increased over the period of the pandemic, whilst of course we were spending more time online and switching from physical meetings to online meetings. The kinds of abuse that we were seeing was also increasing. So it's worth considering whether those kinds of abuse are included in your policies and procedures as well. We are finding that harassment and stalking has really quite significantly increased over the period of the pandemic. And this graph shows that actually we're not talking about sophisticated technologies here. It's the everyday platforms and social media that people are misusing, but during the working day, if you like. So people getting, unsolicited messages from managers late at night, those kinds of things. And that needs to be included and reflected in the policies within the workplace. But the concerning thing here is that over 90% of people reported that this was impacting their mental health, and nearly, just under half said that it had affected them a great deal. So in respect of what previous speakers were talking about, that kind of feeling of not wanting to go back to their jobs, of calling in sick, of that turnover rate, if we don't address these issues and really ensure that all forms of violence and aggression are addressed in our policies and our conversations with staff, then they are likely to feel that they are at risk. And then just this week, Personal Safety Day on Tuesday, we looked specifically, and with the support of People Safe, we did a YouGov survey looking specifically at the harassment of nighttime economy workers. We wanted to understand more about this. We work closely with the Mayor's Office in London to promote their night safety charter. And we also, as I mentioned, are in touch with many unions who have excellent campaigns across the country, including the Unite Unions Get Home Safe campaign. And so we wanted to do our own research to better understand the extent of this and the kinds of behaviours that people were experiencing. So we had a great response to our survey, which was around 1,700 people, specifically nighttime economy workers. But there was a shocking, around a third of all respondents had experienced some sort of unwanted behaviour whilst working or on their way to work. And 15% of those, that was explicitly sexual harassment. And overall, women were affected more, with around 44% of women having experienced harassment compared with 26% of men. So we know that women are disproportionately affected, but it does vary slightly between the behaviours. I know that graph's a bit small, sorry, but we will be circulating these after, and it's all in our report on our website as well. But I suppose what we really wanted to highlight is that these behaviours are unfortunately prevalent. We need to acknowledge that nighttime working might bring additional or different risks, reduced transport services, less street lighting, the addition of alcohol and so on, are all factors in people feeling less safe at work. But really concerningly, these behaviours were people had experienced these behaviours multiple times, so it wasn't just one-off incidents, and it's that accumulative effect of not knowing where the next insult or unwanted behaviour or unsolicited conversation or harassment is going to come from, whether it's from colleagues within the workplace or, of course, if we're in contact with clients, the members of the public, and so on. And so it really does highlight how important it is that we have these conversations and raise these issues and address them in our policies. And we also wanted to understand the extent to which people were reporting. I think somebody put a comment in the chat a bit earlier on about how difficult it is to address these issues if we don't know the full scale of the picture. And we did find out that well, about a third had reported it, but many hadn't. And we think that, well, what people were saying was that they didn't necessarily feel like that there would be any action following it, that they wouldn't get any feedback. They weren't convinced there would be any sort of follow-up to make that worthwhile, essentially. So again, it's about embedding those processes, really. I won't linger on our policy recommendations. Many of them are aimed at the government, including legalising the duty to protect against many forms of harassment in the workplace. But one recommendation to employers that we put in there was to publish their personal safety policy, again to reassure employees that that policy is robust, that it's there for everybody to see, and that conversations can be had about it, and it should be regularly updated. We put advice in there, which can, of course, be shared in your workplaces around what people can do. They experience these behaviours in the workplace, how they might want to report, get the support they need. What we acknowledge, of course, is that if these behaviours are being carried out by colleagues, that poses another level of complication, and people might want to get out external support. Of course, they might want to report directly to the police, but if they're not confident about doing that, there's ways they can get support from other services to help them decide what to do next and how they might want to act on that. So it's that kind of signposting that we would want to ensure that employers had sight of as well. We also wanted to mention our Stand Up Against Street Harassment training. This is something that's free. It gives people the tools and skills and knowledge to safely assess a situation and step in if they think that somebody is experiencing these behaviours. All the information can be found on our website. And I just wanted to mention briefly, wary of time, that we do have Susie's Charter for Workplace Safety, which is a comprehensive framework, really putting in place all the steps that I've mentioned, from how are you going to embed that personal safety culture, how are you going to ensure there's space for those conversations, what are your risk assessments looking like, reporting, and all your personal safety policies and procedures in place there, so that people really feel reassured that you're addressing all their concerns. But do get in touch. I know there's a lot in there, and if anyone has any further questions, we'd be very happy to answer them now or after the webinar.
Thank you very much, Saskia. There's some amazing stats in this topic, and I've found it very interesting just in terms of the broadness of what's going on. We did a webinar around staff retention a few weeks ago, and we had a guest from an energy utility who was talking about his staff, a lot of their call centre staff who now work from home with remote working, and they're getting so many calls that are, given the current energy crisis and cost of living crisis, where you've got big complaints, and unlike before when they were in a call centre, they'd be quite traumatized, and then they'd have no one to talk to afterwards, whereas usually they might then share what's just gone on the phone with their colleagues. So very, very interesting topic. I have just put a poll up for those who've noticed, and I can see that some have, related to what Saskia was just talking around policies. Do you have policies in place to address personal safety? And it's about 45% are saying yes, and a similar number, a bit less, are saying no, and then about 17% saying that they don't know. Let's try and turn to a few of the questions that have been coming in. So one of the questions that caught my eye was, and I know that our speakers have been referring to both, is there any difference between personal safety and personal security? Who would like to answer that one?
I'll give it a go. I didn't know whether it was going to be me or Anil, but it is a grey area, right? And personal security versus personal safety. So we talk about safety quite considerably here, and we've talked about that a lot on the call today, and that's about ensuring you're doing everything that you can to keep safe, or have the ability to be safe, or have the ability to raise the alarm and get help when you need it. I think The security one is probably quite a bit of an overlap, and it might be a case of going back and saying if they could clarify the question a little bit longer. Anyway, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. It felt like there is going to be some overlap. I suppose one way to differentiate it might be that your personal safety is maybe more, as we're talking about from an employment perspective, your safety at work. You could maybe look at it that way, whereas personal security is maybe more steps that you would take. It's the only way I could really differentiate them, but I think there's a big overlap there, and you could probably use both terms interchangeably.
Okay, thank you. Question from me, really. When I was describing this webinar to some colleagues, something that came up a couple of times was when I was describing how we're looking at personal safety and not necessarily just at work. We're talking about on the way to work or whatever that might be. And one of my colleagues said, "Well, surely people should just phone the police. How is it the employer's responsibility?" And to see the results of our polls, clearly a lot of the employers who are tuned in agree that it is their responsibility. Does anyone got any comment on that? Saskia, perhaps you, in terms of how far an issue goes before you might contact the police and what happens in between?
I think one thing to recognise, many of the victims we speak to, particularly about stalking specifically, but more generally as well, is they don't know what support they're going to get from the police as far as the support they might need emotionally and everything else following an incident. Some people aren't convinced that they're going to that their report isn't going to be escalated and they're not going to see something happen further down the line that makes that worthwhile. Some people don't know necessarily the process to go through. So I think that's where it comes back to partly support services, and as an employer to I think in one of the early presentations it was about not necessarily that duty of care, but that conversation and the fact that they are traveling to work. If people don't feel safe on their way to work, then they might well not come to work, or they might change their job, or they might not feel safe in the industry that they're in. So I think it's part of the same conversation, and what we can encourage people to do is highlight the risks that they feel that they're under and work collectively, because actually if somebody comes forward, it might be that 15 other employees say, actually I've experienced that on the bus from wherever, or on that late night train, and then then there's something that you can collectively do, whether it's some of the solutions that Anil was talking about, safe travel home schemes, licensed taxi. It's to me, it's about the culture that we create, where we can have these conversations in the first place, and then we get the scale of the picture, and then we can start really identifying patterns, locations. Is it individual clients that are the problem? Is it individual locations? Is it the times of day or night? I would say then, employer can play a key role in, ensuring that everybody has had their voices heard, and potentially come up with solutions that are not just one incident, but many. Okay, very interesting. And I guess, that is part of it as well. That's one of the questions that came up around ensuring that people are reporting incidents, so that the whole organisation can learn from what's happening. One question that came in from Jackie, perhaps Naz, if you could take this one. She says, so many members of staff and managers I encounter tell me that they have LWDs, is that lone working devices? Yeah. But don't use them either because of feelings about being tracked by their employer. What are your thoughts?
It's a very, very common misconception, to be honest with you. So if I just explain, we do not, and I know other businesses such as us do not track individuals. At the point that you raise the alarm, we get your location. And that's when we are aware where you are. We obviously need your location because we need to know where to send help. and part of the USP of having a service such as ours or competitors is that piece that, you know, if you think about the question earlier about dialing 999 and if you get through is the first problem, right? And then the second problem is, what's the incident? Where are you? Explain the situation, explain your location. Actually, all that is done for you through technology. So there is an advantage to it. And I think that the second part of the question, or the question in the question, was around they don't use it. So maybe some of them have it and it's not just a tracking issue. We spend a hell of a lot of time around training so that we drive up consumption and usage of these devices. And it's as simple of ensuring as you take it in your pocket and take it to work and within the commute with you, because it's always there. So hope that answers it.
Thank you. It does. And then Jackie asked another question. I think it relates to something you were talking about, Anil, on the issue of stress. Often employers have little awareness of employee stress levels because staff don't disclose this until they are under considerable duress. I guess this comes back to sort of the culture of a workplace, doesn't it, Anil?
Well, it does. It does. Yeah, of course. Well, I know in our workplace we have mental well-being champions. So we've got people who are trained as mental first aiders, you know, who are there to act. We're not advisors, you know, I'm trained as one myself, but we are there to listen and signpost colleagues to the appropriate support. But yeah, work related stress, I know it does go hidden. People, I don't know if maybe they see it as a sign of failure or think stress is just part of the job. So I think if it comes from the top, right, where you're encouraging people to, you know, whether it's within policies or, you know, your manager, whoever it may be, who's encouraging people to talk about any pressures. I mean, it's like the, really worrying statistic when you read what, you know, from the Susie Umpley report that, you know, people don't respond, you know, aren't making people aware if, they've been harassed or whatever. I think if there's that open culture of talking about it, you know, because they're not going to be alone, there's going to be other people feeling that, you know, who have been harassed or sworn at or abused. So I think if staff can open up with each other, that's certainly a starting point, because maybe that's less intimidating. But I think just leading from the top to say it is okay to talk about these things, you know, it's part and parcel of a workplace, you know, stress, you know, when you're busy. So I think that's certainly a good starting point, but it's easier in some workplaces than others.
Okay, thanks, Anil. I guess some of the stats that Saskia shared around the people who experience this on multiple occasions really shows how important it is that employers can try and create a workplace culture where their employees can come forward and discuss these issues. Thank you all for your presentations. I found them really interesting, and I'm sure our audience have as well. That is all that we have time for. It's been a really interesting topic, and it hasn't been one that we've done before, not on this topic at all. So thank you very much for working with us. You may notice that there's another poll which I'm just about to launch, which is just to ask for a little bit of feedback about today's webinars. So please do vote in that, or you can vote shortly after the webinar's finished. Do look out for more webinars in the pipeline from Personnel Today. We've got next Thursday, we're looking at engagement and reward in the cost of living crisis and some of the challenges that employers are facing around that topic. And the week after, we're looking at how to empower your talent to drive productivity through learning and talent management strategies. And go to personneltoday.com/webinars to find out more on those. You will receive the slides from today in an email shortly, and also an ability to watch again if you missed any of today's session. Many thanks for joining us today. You've been watching a Personnel Today webinar in association with People Safe. Thanks for joining us, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you all.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.